पहले तो first of all I want to be clear कि I am not going to discuss anything on digital personal data protection bill. I understand there is a lot of interest in that. We will certainly discuss that tomorrow and the days after that. I have today requested you to join me and of course to share some South Indian breakfast, certainly, but also to share with you what I think is an important aspect in the ongoing political discourse and debate about the future of India. There are some political formations that have decided to rebrand themselves because they have some history to be embarrassed by. And in that context, I want to talk to you about the telecom sector, the communication sector in general, and where we are today and where we were. For some of you who have been part of my presentation, live मत करिए, मैं बैठ दे दूँगा, बता दूँगा, वो हमारे लोग हैं, वरुण बता, रिकॉर्ड करना है, I don't know what the drill is, वरुण, पहले रिकॉर्ड करने दीजिए, उसके बाद कर लो रिकॉर्ड, कर लो, मैंने and I had about a month ago presented in the BJP party office a presentation called The Lost Decade to the India Decade. और मैंने मेटी और इलेक्ट्रॉनिक्स की दुनिया में जो 9 साल में प्रोग्रेस हुआ है उसके बारे में मैंने एक प्रेजेंटेशन दिया था. आज उसी कॉन्टेक्स्ट में from the lost decade to the India decade, I want to talk to you about the telecom sector. What was the telecom sector during the UPA and what is the telecom sector today? Of course, you are aware, today we are at about 83 crore Indians connected to the internet, 830 million Indians, the largest base on the global internet, largest single community on the global internet. We are the world's largest connected country, largest connected democracy. Or 2014 में the number was a fraction. That is the starting point of what I want to tell you in terms of the progress and advancement in terms of technology reaching so many Indians, and by 25-26 it is our anticipation that 120 crore Indians will be enabled and connected to the internet, and that will be the deliverable, or that is what the telecom sector would have delivered. Keeping that as a backdrop, I want to share with you 4 points that marks the difference between the lost decade and the India decade. In the lost decade, when you talked about telecom, when you talked about the telecom sector, you essentially talked only about scams. You talked about the 2G scam, you talked about the trunk exchange scam, you talked about how BSNL, which was a $6 billion company in 2004, had become a loss-making, significant liability on public exchequer by 2014. This was the characterization and this was what the lost decade meant vis-a-vis telecom. 2G scam के बारे में मैं ज़्यादा नहीं बोलूँगा, आप जानते ही हैं. There was crony capitalism, crony licensing, new phrases like first come first serve were invented instead of tenders. New analogies and ideologies and phraseologies like zero loss were invented during the last decade by a very senior lawyer come minister. तो ये सब था लॉस्ट डेकेड के टेलीकॉम सेक्टर के कैरेक्टरिस्टिक. और आज क्या हो रहा है, जैसे मैंने कहा, वी आर द फास्टेस्ट ग्रोइंग telecom connectivity nation in the world, the largest connected nation in the world. We have on multiple occasions auctioned spectrum, created licenses with absolute transparency, with absolute integrity. Every rupee that has been gained from the auction of spectrum has gone to the public exchequer and has been deployed in the expanded social spending schemes of the government of India. So that is one clear contrast I wanted to bring to your attention. The second sharp difference between the lost decade and the India decade, between the UPA and the NDA, is how in that lost decade there was a flight of capital and a flight of foreign investors. You remember, and those of you who don't remember, who are too young to remember, and that is also a possibility, that telecom operators like Etisalat, Telenor, there were a large number of telecom international brand names that came, invested in India, and then had to run away from India because they were either, the businesses were destroyed, because of the corruption, because of the crony capitalism. That was the characteristic in the lost decade. और इंडिया डेकेड में आज ईज ऑफ बिजनेस के कारण, सरकार के रिफॉर्म्स के कारण आज एक स्टेबल, ग्रोइंग investor with great positive sentiment are rapidly investing into this sector and only growing the overall market capitalization and size of this segment in the digital economy. Third point, the last decade we were almost completely dependent on imports, whether they were equipment for the network or for devices that were used by consumers. और आज मैं आपके सामने, आप देख रहे होंगे कि मैं मंत्री हूँ, तीन फोन लेके घूमता हूँ, but I carry this with me because all three phones that I use are made in India. And this is again the big difference between the last decade and the India decade, where in the last decade over 85 to 86% of all devices were imported, almost 100% of the equipment was imported, and today 100% of the devices are made, tested, assembled in India, exported from India to countries like North America, and in cutting edge areas like 5G, increasingly the value of Indian designed and Indian made components of the network infrastructure is growing from almost zero to a higher percentage year on year. ये हो गया तीसरा point. Almost completely dependent on import to becoming more and more Atmanirbhar and made in India. Fourth, in the last decade, the consumers had constantly quality of service, dropped calls. I don't know how many of you remember again. पूरा का पूरा नैरेटिव होता था कि मेरे कॉल्स ड्रॉप हो रहे हैं, क्वालिटी ऑफ सर्विस के बारे में कोई सोच नहीं रहा है, सरकार नहीं, ट्राई नहीं, and this is always a debate between the consumer and the operator about why the consumers did not have any voice, the consumers did not have a right to quality service. In the India decade, that whole equation has been turned 180 degrees. Networks are much higher quality today. Operators are incentivized and tasked with investing more and more base stations and capacities in the wireless networks. And even in the 5G, which we have launched as one of the few countries to have launched it, we are the second fastest rolled out 5G network in the world. And over 700 districts in India have already had 5G coverage. Over 500,000 base stations have been rolled out in this cutting edge technology. And we are already having a vision and a roadmap for 6G. And I wanted to just summarize for you in this overall debate and discourse about politics and UPA becoming something else and all of that, and this tendency and the temptation for the opposition to pretend that people don't have memories, that the 10 years of UPA in telecom was certainly a lost decade, was certainly a corruption-filled, crony capitalism-led sector, to today's India decade age, when telecom is playing a very, very important role in expanding the digital economy and leading us to $1 trillion goal by 2026. But that is all I had to say, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you. Telecom के achievements और भी हैं. I don't want to leave the impression with you that the only 4 points were that I said. There are many other, but they all fall under the broad category of the 4 things that I said.
You said they are ready with a vision and roadmap for 6G. Could you elaborate a bit?
Look, one of the things that the Honorable Prime Minister did way back in late 21, early 22 by launching the first indigenous 5G testbed is to signal that in the future networks and the future network infrastructure, there would be more and more designed in India, made in India components from the almost 100% import intensity of these networks that we have seen for several decades, including the decade that the UPA was in government. So we have a roadmap as the virtualization, softwareization of these networks increase, that Indian IP, Indian technology will find a significant place in the future of wireless networks in general and in the future of wireless IP networks in India in particular. Anji. No, look, I don't want to get into these characterizations. आपका personal view है कि वो dying है. I don't see any imminent death. Look, let me just say this. I cannot comment on a particular private company's business strategy. Some companies decide to bypass 4G and they do 5G. Some people decide to not to do 3G, go to 4G. Those are business strategies depending on their clientele and their customer profile. As far as I am concerned, and I was asked a question about 10 days ago in another context, what do I see the landscape of telecom operators in India? I see no reason for us to believe that there will be anything less than 4 operators and 4 telcos, given the size of this market and increasingly the diversity of services that are going to be offered to those who use the internet on the other side. Like I said, India is going to have 120 crore Indians that are using the internet. Primarily, they use the wireless internet, which is 5G, 4G, 3G, to access the internet. And therefore, with such a large market and the growing intensity and complexity of the domestic internet with IoT on the back of 5G, I see no reason why there will be anything less than 4 operators, viable, successful operators. If I could first request you to ask me questions, I'll give you plenty of gyan on telecom and future and all that as my favorite subject. वो वड़ा के साथ बात कर लेंगे. On the basic proposition that between the lost decade and the India decade, the telecom sector has undergone a dramatic and positive transformation. On that, if you have any questions, first let's address that, and then I'll give you all of my. Yeah, go ahead. Okay. Yeah, so therefore, if you look at the last 9 years, there has never been an occasion for bidding for new licenses. What has happened in the last 9 years has been auction of spectrum. And the auction of spectrum were to companies that were already in the telecom sector. From 3G, the spectrum was auctioned for 4G, or spectrum was auctioned for 5G. So therefore, that question is a bit irrelevant, because when there was an opening up of the telecom sector from the 2 to the 3, there was a large number of operators that came. But because of the environment, because of the very non-transparent ways of allocating spectrum, people who did not get spectrum invested and had to leave. What happened was essentially that the gaming of the spectrum allocation that was then controlled by a few people who had access to the political class of that time, or the political leadership of that time, led every other genuine operator, left them either with an unviable business case or with no spectrum or both. And so they had no option otherwise unless they got into some other business. The current, I answered that question in the context of him characterizing one of the current 4 operators as being unviable or going to die or whatever the word was. I said I see no reason for that to happen. There are 4 operators today. There is 120 crore users of the internet that are going to be coming on board in the next 3 years, and I see no reason for that characterization to have any merit. That's the point I have.
Sir, and pardon my ignorance, but under what circumstances will licenses be available to use telcos?
That is a little beyond my pay scale, so I can't certainly answer that. I am not the telecom minister. I am only here to tell you what was the telecom sector between 2004 and 14, and what is the telecom sector between 2014 and 2023. That certainly you can toss any question at me. I will be more than happy to answer.
Sir, in that context, do you, I mean, with the way that we are headed towards this thing, we are seeing that in the private sector we have about 2 very viable companies right now. One which is very fledgling. BSNL, a lot of money has been pumped into BSNL, and let's hope that sort of pays off. Do you foresee that the telecom sector, which at one stage was a sunrise sector and now is sort of constricted between 2.5 to 3 companies, do you see that the sector could potentially open up with more operators coming into India?
So, Soumendra, I will tell you the following. I don't know if you followed what is happening. Sorry. The way we see the telecom sector and the IP sector, the internet space in general, should be not to assume that the current model of carriers will be the model of carriers in the future. There may be all types of different models that will emerge as a result of innovation. You are seeing, for example, recently a deal that was done by a company in Bangalore called Route Mobile. So there is CPaaS, there are so many other innovations down the road that lend themselves to the softwareization of the telecom network, that if today you want to predict what will be the market structure of IP networks 5 years from now, I am certainly not somebody who is going to predict what it's going to look like. So that is why I said to assume that the current market structure will be the future market structure, or that a company that took a decision in the current marketplace not to invest in 4G but go straight to 5G, those are all decisions that companies take. But I see simply this, that in the last 10 years, our government has created an extremely healthy, vibrant, growing telecom sector. 120 crore Indians are going to have access to the internet. And I certainly want to share one story with you, since you asked the question, Sumendra, that recently I visited a remote district of Nagaland, where I was the first minister to visit there after 50 years. And the district was, the village was in a district called Zuniboto. And in the morning when I met a community of 600 people, I said, how many of you get how many of you have Aadhaar? So pure 600 said they have Aadhaar. How many of you get your subsidies and benefits delivered online on the internet? All 600 of them. So what I want to say is that this is not about statistics and numbers, that this orderly expansion of the internet, orderly expansion and growth of the telecom sector in the last 9 years has benefited the most remote Indian citizen to be able to connect and get the benefits of government and governance that has been put forth by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And that is why telecom and the orderly growth of telecom, the growth of telecom, the scam-free growth of telecom has been an important part of the digital economic growth, the digital governance growth, the maximum governance narrative of our Prime Minister's mission in terms of delivering governance to all. Yes, go ahead. No, 100%. We have clearly, the Prime Minister has already laid out that our digital economy goals, for which telecom is a part, what we call the digital service providers, is going to be 20% minimum of the GDP by 2026. We were at 4.2% in 2014. We are at about 11% today. That is 11% of the GDP is digital economy today. And about 20% will be of the GDP will be digital economy in 2026. So certainly that is the direction we are going, and that is why the telecom sector and this transformation of the telecom sector into this clean, no need for any minister to say zero loss, no need for anybody to say first come first serve sector जो हमने बनाया है, ये हमारे डिजिटल इकोनॉमी गोल के लिए, हमारे लोगों के जीवन में ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन लाने के लिए बहुत ही एक इम्पोर्टेंट कार्यक्रम था।
सर, आप डिजिटल इकोनॉमी की बात कर रहे हैं।
हाँ जी सर।
साथ कई चैलेंजेस भी हैं। मैं इससे पूछ रहा हूँ कि न्यूज़ दिल्ली से महज 100 किलोमीटर की दूरी पे वो एक साइबर क्राइम का हब बन चुका है। क्या आपको लगता है कि बहुत बड़ा चैलेंज है और सरकार को इससे कुछ करने की जरूरत है?
देखिए इसमें मैं ये नहीं कह रहा हूँ कि हमारे पास चैलेंजेस नहीं है। टेक्नोलॉजी के दुनिया में और टेलीकॉम के दुनिया में जैसे हम कनेक्टिविटी का, एम्पावरमेंट का जो हम गुड भी डिलीवर करते हैं, उसमें हार्म भी होता है। हार्म काफी सारे हार्म है, उसके लिए हम आईटी रूल्स लेके आ रहे हैं सिस्टमैटिकली टू डील विथ ऑल ऑफ दीज इश्यूज ऑफ हार्म इंक्लूडिंग साइबर क्राइम। तो ये मैं ये डिनाई नहीं करूंगा कि साइबर क्राइम एक इश्यू है, लेकिन हम उस पे हम काफी काम कर रहे हैं और उसके नतीजे भी निकलेंगे। ये वो उसका मैं अभी इस पर टिप्पणी नहीं करूंगा, बाद में वी कैन टॉक अबाउट दैट। Yes. No, but what else will they say? I mean, if they are in a tearing rush to forget UPA, forget the 10 years that they ran riot in this country, and they want to rebrand themselves and pretend that everybody else has forgotten what they have done, that's what they will say. And we, as a government, believe in putting the facts forward in terms of the hard work that Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji has undertaken in the last 9 years, 10 years. The details and facts of the transformation are there in front of you. And finally, in my opinion, the democratic process is about a clash over or a debate over facts, not debate about fiction. So I think if they have some imaginary delusion in their mind, there is, like I always say, in democracy, there is a right to be delusional as much as there is a right to be have free speech. देखिए वो और क्या बोलेंगे, जो एक तरह से गठबंधन जिन्होंने यूपीए के टाइम में, यही गठबंधन, यही कोalition ने 2G स्कैम और टेलीकॉम सेक्टर को बर्बाद करने का यही एक कोalition का रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी था। आज वो अपने नाम को बदलकर कुछ और नए नाम इन्वेंट करना चाहते हैं, तो वो और क्या बोलेंगे। हमारे सरकार का, हमारे पार्टी का एक पूरा विश्वास है कि हमने जो प्रधानमंत्री मोदी जी ने जो 9 साल में उन्होंने काम किए हैं, जो ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन उन्होंने लाया है, वो हम लोगों के सामने रखेंगे, हर लोग के सामने, हर व्यक्ति के सामने रखेंगे और लोग तय करेंगे। और ये डिबेट होगा फैक्ट्स पर, अचीवमेंट्स पर, रिपोर्ट कार्ड पर। और कोई कुछ बोले, कोई ट्वीट कुछ करे, उससे कुछ मुझे नहीं लगता है प्रभाव पड़ेगा। और वो जो इसको करना है वो करते रहे। मैंने पहले भी कहा है, हमारे कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में डिल्यूजनल होने का भी फंडामेंटल राइट है, जैसे फ्री स्पीच का भी फंडामेंटल राइट है।
सर, इन हिंदी,
हाँ जी बोल दिया मैंने हिंदी में।
कितने करोड़ भारतीय हैं जिनको आपको लगता है, आपने कहा 120 करोड़ लोगों को इंटरनेट फैसिलिटी, कब तक ये सुविधा मिलेगी और क्या गवर्नमेंट की रहेगी?
आज के दिन में 85 करोड़ यानी 85 करोड़ भारतवासी इंटरनेट से हमारे टेलीकॉम सेक्टर के द्वारा जुड़ रहे हैं, जुड़ चुके हैं। और वो जो जुड़े हैं वो महिला हैं, बच्चे हैं, बुजुर्ग हैं, रूरल कम्युनिटी से हैं, अर्बन कम्युनिटी से हैं, जो स्टेट कैपिटल से बहुत दूर रहते हैं, उनको सब मेन स्ट्रीम में भारत सरकार के साथ जोड़ने का, उनके राज्य सरकार के साथ जोड़ने का एक तरह से काम टेलीकॉम सेक्टर ने किया है। बाकी और हमारे देश बना है दुनिया के सबसे बड़े कनेक्टेड डेमोक्रेसी और सबसे बड़े कनेक्टेड देश। फिर भी ऐसे 40 करोड़ लोग हैं जो इंटरनेट से बाहर हैं और उन्हें भी इंटरनेट से जोड़ेंगे भारत नेट और 5G जैसे हमारे नए नए जो प्रोग्राम्स हैं। और हमारा मानना है या हमारा ऑब्जेक्टिव ये है कि 2025-26 तक ये 120 करोड़ लोग पूरे के पूरे भारतवासी इस इंटरनेट से जुड़ने के काबिल हो और जुड़ने के उनके पास कैपेसिटी और एक्सेस हो। हाँ जी।
Just wanted to ask, this NAVIC that we are developing and the Shakti chip, when do you think these could go into Indian smartphones and how you are going to do that?
Wrong press conference. We will discuss this in a different press conference. I'll talk to you.